Welcome to Qtomation channel. In today's tutorial, we will see about conditional statements in JavaScript. But before that, let's understand what is control statement in programming language. So control statements are mainly used to control the flow of execution of code, right? So in our code, there can be multiple statements, right? So there can be statement 1, statement 2, statement 3. Similarly, there can be n number of statements and execution happens from top to bottom, right? So sometimes we face some scenarios in which we have to execute some set of statements on specific conditions. For example, if I have some condition and I want that these three statements should get executed only on specific condition, right? And even sometimes there can be multiple conditions. For example, if I want to execute some statement first for specific condition, and if that condition is not fulfilled, then I have to execute some other set of statements, right? So for such scenarios, we have to use conditional statements, right? So conditional statement is type of control statement. So those scenarios, for such scenarios, we have to use some conditional statements. Similarly, sometimes we have to repeat some statements in loop, right? For example, sometimes I might have some scenario in which we have to repeat some statement multiple times, right? So that is iteration, right? So we have to loop such statements multiple times. So for those, we have to use some special statements that are known as looping statements, right? Or iteration statements, correct? Similarly, sometimes we have to exit from the code at some certain points as per some specific condition, right? Or sometimes even we have to skip some statements while execution. So in such scenarios, we have to use jumping statements. So these are our different types of control statements in JavaScript or any other programming language as well, right? So this is used in different programming languages as well. So this is how we can control the flow of execution of code, right? Now let's move to slides. So mainly control statements are divided in three categories, that are conditional statements, looping or iteration statements, or jumping statements, right? In conditional statements there is if else or switch case. So in today's tutorial we will mainly focus on conditional statements, and in coming lectures we will see other statements as well. So this is how the control statements looks, and there can be conditional, looping, and jumping statements, right? So what are mainly the conditional statements that we will see today, correct? Now let's see some basic flow of if statement. If statement, so basically if statement is the fundamental control statement that allows JavaScript to make decisions and execute statements conditionally. For example, if that specific condition, I have to mention some condition, and if that condition becomes true, then the specific statements will get executed which are mentioned in that block. And if the condition becomes false, then we move to the next statement and we don't execute the statements which are mentioned for that condition, right? So this is how the if statement works. So basic syntax of if statement is like this. So basically we have to write if in lowercase, in bracket we have to mention the condition, or it's also called as an expression. So once this condition becomes true, then only then only this statement will get executed which are in this block, right? So this is basically opening of curly bracket and closing of curly bracket, and whatever code or statement we put in these brackets, that will get executed only when this expression or condition becomes true. Now let's see practically how it works. So I'm just going to open the Visual Studio. In this, I think we have seen in our last lecture that we have already installed node environment, so we can directly execute JS file. So I'm just going to create one JS file. Let's name it as conditional.js. Let's name this file as conditional.js. Now let's see one example of if condition. So what I'm going to do, if the number is positive number that is greater than 0, then we will print that number is positive. Let's see how we can do that by using if statement. So I'm going to define one variable, let x is equal to, or let's simply name it as let my num is equal to 5, right? And let's put if condition now. If, so I'm going to mention the condition, if my num, I'm using comparison operator, greater than 0. So we want to check whether number is positive or not. So if any number which is greater than 0 is positive number, so I'm just going to use comparison operator, and I'm comparing my num is greater than 0. Now this condition will return either true or false depending on the value of my num. So I will just open curly bracket and close curly bracket, and within this block I can write console.log number is positive. Right, so if my num is equal to 5, so we will compare here whether this my num is greater than 0. If this condition becomes true, then we will enter in this block and it will print that number is positive. And if this condition is false, that means if my num value is not greater than 0, then we will not enter in this block and it will directly go to the next statement. So let's say out of this block we are writing one more statement, console.log program exited. Let's save this file and let's run and see what happens. Node conditional.js, pressing enter, you can see here. So in this case, the my num value is equal to 5. So this condition becomes true and then we will enter in this block and it executed that number is positive, right? So we have seen here number is positive, and once this statement, after this statement, we move to the next statement. That is, we came out of this block and it printed a program exited. Right, so this is the simple if condition can work. Right, now similarly, along with if condition, there can be a else block as well. So what happens in if else block? Right, so if statement is used to check the specific condition, and if that condition becomes correct, then if block statement gets executed. And if false, if that if condition becomes false, then we can also mention some else block, and in that else block, once the if condition becomes true, then that else block will get executed. So for example, you can see the flowchart here. If condition becomes true, that which we have just recently saw, that if condition is true, then that if condition block will get executed, and then after that we will move to the next statement. But if this condition become false, then we will execute the else statement whichever mentioned in that else block, and after the else block we will go to the next statement. So in that case, whenever the if condition becomes false, then we will not execute the if condition block, right? So that will directly go to the else code, else block, and that will execute the code which are mentioned in that else block, and after that we will exit from the code. Now let's see practically how if else statement works. So I am just going to use simply same program. So we have previously checked for if condition. Now here I am just going to modify a bit. Now if the my num is greater than 0, then we are printing that number is positive, right? I am just going to add one more block here. Let's say else, and the in else block I will simply mention if number is not positive, that means number is negative. So console.log number is negative. I'm just saving the file. So what will happen here? It will first check the first block, that is if block. If my num is greater than 0, so it will check whether my num value is greater than 0. So if this value is greater than 0, then it will print that number is positive, and it will skip the else block. It will not enter in the else block if if this condition is true. It will simply print the number is positive, and it will directly move to the this block, that is console.log. It will exit from the blocks and it will directly move to the next statement, that is console.log program exited. Now let's check, run and let's check the same. You can see here, right? So it printed that number is positive as my num value is greater than 0, right? And after that it moved to the out of the block statement, that is console.log program exited. Now let's put some negative value here and let's see what happens. Now I'm going to put -5 here, correct? So as soon as I put -5, so it compares the first block, that is if my num is greater than 0. So -5 is not greater than 0, that means this condition returns false. So code will we will not enter in this block, so it will not execute that number is positive, correct? So it will directly go to the else block and it will execute whatever mentioned in the else block. So in that case it will directly give the output as console.log number is negative, right? So it will show that number is negative, and after that it will move to the next statement, that is it will print program exited. Now let's run again this file and see what happens, right? So you can see here, so it printed number is negative because -5 is not greater than 0, right? So it directly went to the else block and it printed number is negative, and after that we came out of the else block and it moved to the next statement, that is console.log program exited, right? So this is the simple example of how if else statement works. Similarly, now after if else, there can be multiple conditions as well. So for example, if my one condition fails and I want to check whether second condition works or not, so I can move to the second if block and I will check the second condition of that if block. Similarly, I can keep going on multiple if blocks for checking the multiple conditions, right? So that comes under if else block. So we can put in a program after if statement if any number of else if statement can be followed, and if statement is used to check the specified condition, and if that is correct then if block statement will get executed, and if it's false then it will move to the next if condition, and if that condition becomes correct then it will execute the code which are mentioned in that specific if block. Similarly, we can keep going on for multiple if conditions, and whenever that condition matches we will execute the code whichever mentioned in that if block. And if none of the condition matches then there will be at the end there will be one else block, so by default it will execute the code whichever mentioned in that else block. So this is how the flow chart look for the multiple if else block. So it will check for the first if condition, and if that is true then it will execute that code, and after that it will move to the next statement. And if this condition is not true, if this condition is false, then it will directly go to the next if condition, that is else if condition, and it will check for this condition. If this condition becomes true then it will execute the code which you are mentioned for the that if block, and it will after that it will move to the next statement. Otherwise it will keep going on. So if this condition become also false then it will check for the further next condition which are mentioned in the if block. Similarly it will go on. So if there is no match for any if condition, then by default it will execute the else statement which are mentioned at the end, right? And after the else statement it will execute the next statement. Now let's see practically. So we will follow the same code whichever we have written. So in the same example, we have checked whether number is positive and as well as number is negative. Now what if the number is 0, right? So there is possibility that number can be 0 as well. So we will put just slightly modify this condition. So if my num is greater than 0 then we are printing that number is positive. Now I'm just going to change this code, else if my num is less than 0, that means that number is negative, right? So else if my num is less than 0, that means it will print console dot number is negative. Similarly, my number can be 0 as well, right? So I will put one more condition, else if my num equal to 0. So we have used comparison operator, right? So we have two times used equal to signs, right? So understand the difference between assignment operator and comparison operator. If here we are assigning the value of -5 to my num variables, that's why we have used only single equal to sign, whereas in this time this is the comparison operator and we are checking the condition here. So we are comparing whether my num value is equal to 0 or not, and it will return boolean value, that is true or false depending on the my num value, right? So we are just simply mentioning this condition. So I'm just creating one block, so we can simply put if my num is greater if my num is equal to 0, then we will simply print console.log number is 0, right? So we have put two conditions. three conditions here, 1, 2 and third condition. And if none of the condition matches, for example, if I put some, instead of number, if I put here some string, or let's say some word here, that is invalid input for that my number, right? So what should happen in that case? That we can mention in else block. Else it will simply print console.log, please enter valid number, and I am just saving this file. Now let's clear this console first. Right, now let's execute this node conditional.js. Right, so here number is negative because we have put the -5 value. Now let's put some 0 value here and let's see what happens. I'm just saving the file. So here my num value is 0. So what should happen? So it will check the first condition. If my num is greater than 0, so 0 is not greater than 0, right? So this, it will not enter in this block. It will check for the second block then. Else if my num is less than 0, now this condition is also not true, right? So this will, again it will not go into this block. Next we will check else if my num is equal to 0. So now we have put the 0 value for my num. So this condition will become true. That's why it will print number is 0. Right, let's execute this file. You can see here output, right? So it printed that number is 0, correct? Now similarly, let's check what if I put some invalid value here. For example, let's put some string value. Now this is not the number input, right? So what should happen? Let's execute this file. See, it printed that please enter valid number, whatever we have mentioned in the else block, right? So it did not match with any input. So for example, hello, so if my num is greater than 0, that this condition becomes false. So it did not enter in the block, in this block. It checked for the next condition, whether my num is less than 0. So this condition also became false. Similarly, this condition also become false. So none of the if condition matched with the my num value. That's why at the end it executed the code whichever mentioned in the else block. That is why it printed that please enter valid number. So this is the simple example of how multiple if else condition works, right? Now we will see one more example. In our next example, let me clear this one. So in the next example, we will give some three numbers and we have to find out which one is the greatest of them, right? So whatever value of variable is greatest, we will print that value. So how we can check? So let's create three variable first. Let's say let a is equal to 10, let b is equal to 20, and let c is equal to, let's say, 30. Right, so I have defined three variables and we have given some values. So a is 10, b is 20 and c is 30. Now I want to check, so I will just simply put one if condition. Here I will use comparison and logical operators together. So let's say if a is greater than b and a is greater than c. So what we are putting here, so we are checking whether a is greater than b and a is greater than c. If a is greater than b as well as a is greater than c, that means a is the greatest number, right? So this will return one boolean value, this will also return one boolean value, and we will perform the logical AND operation. So in logical AND operation, if any value, so at least one value needs to be true. If any value, sorry, so in logical AND, if both the values needs to be true, then only it will return the true value. So then only it will enter in our if block. So if a is greater than b as well as a is greater than c, then both the values will become true and it will print that a is greatest. So I will simply print console.log a is greatest. Similarly, I will put one more block. I will check for b as well. So I will simply put else if b greater than a and B greater than C. So if B is greater than A, so here I am checking whether B is greater than A as well as B is greater than C as well. So if both the condition becomes true, that means our B is greatest number, right? Console.log B is greatest number. And if both the condition fails, so for example, if A is not the greatest number and B is also not the greatest number, so in that case obviously the C is the greatest one, correct? So we will simply put else console.log C is greatest number. Now let's save this file. So here C is currently we have put the greatest value. Now let's save the file and let's see what happens. I'm just running the file again. So see here it printed that C is greatest numbers, right? So it checked first key whether A is greater than B and A is greater than C as well. So this condition become false. So it will not enter in this block. It again checked whether B is greater than A and B is greater than C. Now this condition also becomes false. So it did not enter in this block. So similarly, if A is not greater than B and B is also not greatest number, then obviously our C is the greatest one, correct? So that why it entered in the last block, that is else block, and it put that C is greatest number. Right, now let's change the values and see how it works. So I am going to put A as, let's say, 50. Now A is our greatest number. Let's save this file and again run the same file. Right, now it printed that A is greatest number because this both the condition become true in the first attempt only. So if it check this time, if A is greater than B, so A is 50, 50 is greater than 20, and 50 A is greater than C as well, 50 is greater than 30 as well. So this both the condition becomes true. That's why it entered in the if block and it printed that A is greatest number, correct? So this is how if else block works. Now let's see one more example. So I'm just going to clear this, and again I'm clearing the console. Now in the next example I want to check if the weekday is 1, if the value of weekday is 1, then it's a Sunday. If weekday is equal to 2, that means it's Monday. Similarly, if weekday is equal to 7, if the value of weekday is 7, then I want to print Saturday, right? So I'm just going to define one variable here. Let weekday is equal to 1, and I'm going to use if condition. If we are going to check here, if comparison operator, if weekday is equal to 1, that means it's a Monday. So I am just printing console.log today is Sunday. Similarly, I want to print for rest of the days as well. So I will simply put else if weekday is equal to 2, then console.log will print today is Monday. Similarly, we have to check for other days as well. So I'm just copy pasting. If it's a 3, then it should print Tuesday. If it's 4, then it should print Wednesday. If it's 5, then it should print Thursday. Similarly, if it's 6, then it should print Friday. If it's 7, then it should print Saturday. And if it's other than values 1 or 7, 1 to 7, then it should print some. So else, if value is not matching between 1 to 7, then we can simply print console.log invalid day, right? So this is how it will work. So we are checking the value of the weekday. So currently I have put the value of weekday as 1. So it should print today is Sunday. Now let's save this file and run it again. Let's see what happens. Right, so it printed that today is Sunday. Now let's change the value. Now I am going to put some another value. Let's say put it as a 4. And again run the file. Right, so it printed today is Wednesday. Right, so it checked, it goes on checking. It first check whether the value is 1. So this is not 1, right? So it will not enter in this block. It then checked whether value is 2. Similarly, again value is not 2, so it will also return false, so it did not enter in this block, right? Similarly, it keep on checking until it matches the value, right? So here it matches the value. So here weekday is equal to 4 and we have given the value of weekday here is as 4, right? So this condition matches, that's why it printed that today is Wednesday, right? So this is how else if block or else if statement works in JavaScript for multiple conditions. Now again, if I give some invalid value, for example, we have mention that if it's other than 1 to 7, for example, if I put 9 here, then what will happen? Then it will go on checking and it will not match any day, right? So it will go on last block, that is else block, and it will print that this is invalid day. That's why it printed invalid day, correct? So this is how multiple if else statement works in JavaScript. Now let's see one more statement is there, so that is switch case, right? So we have seen in this example that there are 7 days, right? So we have created code for 7 conditions, but what if there are 30 or there are more than 50 type of conditions? So in that case the code becomes very lengthy, right? So similar, that's why there is switch case can be used for such times. So whenever you can see here, right, code becomes very lengthy with this multiple else if condition. So by using switch case we can shorten the code and we will make it more efficient. So let's see how we can make that. So switch statement compares the given expression with other values specified in the case statement. And if the any of them matches, then particular case clause will be executed. And if no expression matches, then what will happen? Then default clause in the given statement block will be executed. So this is the syntax of switch case, right? So we will use switch keyword. We will mention condition here or expression here, and it will check whether this condition matches with any case condition. So if case condition and one, so right, so if matches with the first condition, that will it will execute the code which are mentioned for that specific condition. And by using the break keyword, it will not go further, right? So if the condition satisfies here, it becomes true here, then it will simply execute this statement and it will break, it will come out of the code, right? So it will not go on checking for another conditions, right? Similarly, if none of the condition matches, right, if all the condition becomes false, then by default whatever mentioned in the default statement here, right? So if you can see here, default whatever code is mentioned here, that will get executed. If none of the any other condition does not match, then it will execute the default condition, right? So let's see how we can do the same, how we can change the same code whichever we have created here for multiple if else, how we can do some same code with switch case. So I'm just going to create one new file, saving the file. Now I'm going to use the same example. So let's say I'm again going to define one weekday variable. Let weekday is equal to, so I'm not let weekday is equal to 1. I will use the switch statement here, switch in bracket weekday, opening the curly bracket. Now I am just going to give the case and the condition which we have to check. So here we have to check whether if the day is 1. So for example, if my day is 1, then what I have to print. So if case is 1, then console.log, it should print today is Sunday, right? That's what we did in the last example, right? And once if this condition becomes true, then we have to come out of this condition. So we will simply use break statement here. So if the weekday is equal to 1, then it will check. If case 1 gets satisfied, it becomes true, then it will simply execute this statement, and by using break it will stop the execution and it will come out of the code. It will not go on checking for the further condition, right? So similarly, let's copy paste the same for other conditions as well. Second condition, we will print Monday. If it's 3, if weekday value is 3, then we will put Tuesday. If it's 4, then it will print Wednesday. If it's 5, it will print Thursday. And for 7, Saturday. And what if the condition does not match with any of these, right? So we have to give some default, right? So if none of the matches, then it will by default execute the statement which are mentioned in the default, right? So it will print console.log. We can say simply invalid day. Saving the file. Now let's put some value here. So I am going to give 5 value this time. Save this file and let's run it again. So I'm just saving the file. Right, so we have given value of weekday is equal to 5. Oh, sorry. So mistake was here. So I was just running the previous file. So we have to run this time switch.js file, right? So let's run node switch.js, right? So it printed today is Thursday, right? So we can see here. So if weekday is equal to 5, then it directly checked which condition matches. So case 1 is not matching, case 2 is not matching, case 3 is not matching, 4 is not matching. It is matching here, right? So case 5, it will print today is Thursday, right? That's why it printed today is Thursday. And as soon as this case matched, we have used break keyword, right? So break keyword is used to come out of the code. So it will not go for checking 6 and 7. If you don't use the break statement here, then it will, even though this condition becomes true, it will still go on checking for the further conditions, right? So to avoid that, we will use the break statement. We have used the break statement. So as soon as it condition matches, then it will print and it will come out of this code. Now let's change this value and check once again. So I'm just going to mention some 3 value this time. Save this and let's run switch.js again. Right, so it printed here that today is Tuesday, correct? So this is how switch case works. If let's put some another value, for example, let's put 66. Now this is obviously not matching with any condition, right? So it's not matching with 1 to 7. So it will ideally go to the default and it will print the default statement, that is invalid day. So let's run this file node switch.js. See, it printed the invalid day. So this is how the switch case works, right? So main benefit of switch case, that it can reduce the size of your code, right? So if you see our previous example in which we have used conditional, right, conditional if else multiple times. So if you see the code size, that is linear, right, it is 32 lines approximately, correct? But the same code I can write by using switch statement within this very short right, so it is very short, right? So that is how the benefit of switch case, right? So if there are multiple conditions, for example there can be 100 conditions, so we can simply use switch case in such scenarios, right, instead of multiple if else. So this is how the different conditional statements works, right? So in today's lecture we have mainly seen if else condition and switch case statements, right? In the next lecture we will see about the looping statements, right? So how we can loop the multiple statements, so that we will see in the coming lecture. So thank you for watching this tutorial, guys. Let's meet you all in the next tutorial.